Platinum Jubilee CME. In fact, today being a holiday, so there has been a little bit less in the attendance, and I believe with the passage of time, the attendance will definitely grow further. Nihar is very closely known to me. He was with me in Burla. He was doing his MS. Now he's professor of JE surgery, surgical gastroenterology, All India Institute of Medical Science. I welcome Nihar to this forum.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar. I also welcome our ex faculty of surgical gastroenterology, Durjatan Sahu. I believe Professor Dhir Mahapatra will join in due course of time. It is indeed a privilege on my part to welcome you here. The SCB, which has already passed 77 years of its existence, will be celebrating its Platinum Jubilee on 26th, 27th, and 28th of November. As part of the celebration, we thought we'll start the celebration on an auspicious day on 1st July. That is the National Doctors' Day. So we have conceptualized this that we should have an academic jubilation. In the academic jubilation, we have involved all the departments, 37 departments, and we have requested them to invite SCBN and expertise of their specialty outside the state and if required also outside the country. There has been a lot of enthusiasm over the last 14 that we have already conducted. Enthusiasm is really at a height, and this is becoming really fruitful, contributory as regard the academic development is concerned. I welcome you with further putting my viewpoint that please join. We are having a second phase on 13th of September, that is 75 for 75. That will be depicting the 75 glorious years of existence of SCB. There where all stakeholders will be participating on a day basis, and they will be presenting their past, present, future. Finally, we have the program of 26, 27, and 28. That is Platinum Jubilee Celebration and SCBN Global Conclave. I take the opportunity through this platform to request all SCBM to kindly register as a registered alumnus. Go to the website, which is www.scbmchalumni.in. www.scbmchalumni.in. Once you log in, then you will go to the member section where you can go for a registration online. I think it is hassle-free and one can easily register himself. Even you can download your certificate of registration also. I would expect and also appeal to all the participants to request as many number of alumni as possible to come forward and join in this jubilation. I welcome all the speakers, the participants, all our senior teachers and colleagues. With these few words, I hand over to Dr. Sarat Singh to conduct the proceedings.
Good afternoon to our respected Dean and Principal, my teachers, my colleagues, and the esteemed attendees of the meeting, both inside and outside the country. Today, on behalf of the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology, we have two speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Satyaprasad Samantray. He is assistant professor in our department. He has completed his MS degree in general surgery from MKCG Medical College, Berhampur, and then MCS in GI surgery from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi. And our second his topic is on pancreatic ascites. Our second speaker is Dr. Niharanjan Das. He is at present serving as professor of GI surgery at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. Being son of the soil, he has completed MBBS from MKC Medical College, Berhampur, with honors and gold medals. and MS from VSS Medical College, Noida. Then he did 1 year ICMR course and 3 years of CSIR research, and he was worked as lecturer in surgery in MKC's Medical College, then professor in a medical college at Lucknow. As a surgeon, he is excellent with the experience of being a visiting as well as a operating surgeon at Brigham Health Science University, Portland, USA. He has nearly 100 publications and so many topics in different GI surgery books to his credit. He has received many.
Voice is not heard.
He has received many awards and from.
Voice is not heard.
Unmute, unmute.
He has received many awards and accolades from different national and international bodies for his remarkable surgical work in the field of gastrointestinal surgery. Moreover, he has organized many workshops and seminars for benefit of the GI surgeons as well as the general surgeons. We really are fortunate to today to have such an eminent surgeon with us. He will be speaking on gastrointestinal manifestations of COVID-19. He is working as professor in All India Institute of Medical Science in Department of GI Surgery. And on my personal opinion, he is more than an artist than a surgeon. So he is a surgical artist. I appreciate his dissection and reconstruction procedures when I was his student at All India Institute. Respecting all you, enjoyable good afternoon. Thank you.
This topic for me today is pancreatic ascites. Pancreatic ascites is one of the very few causes of ascites in total, and it accounts for about 1% of the ascites. By definition, pancreatic ascites means massive accumulation of pancreatic fluid inside peritoneal cavity. There are many causes of pancreatic ascites. Chronic pancreatitis secondary to alcohol use being the commonest, and 4% of patients with chronic pancreatitis present with pancreatic ascites, and 6 to 14% patients with pancreatic pseudocyst present with pancreatic ascites. Other causes of pancreatic ascites are acute pancreatitis, pancreatic trauma, idiopathic, or it may also result from a therapeutic intervention like drainage of the pancreatic pseudocyst by endoscopic ultrasound guidance. The mechanism of pancreatic ascites is that there is a leak from the pancreatic ductal system, be it from a main duct or a pancreatic side branch duct or from a pseudocyst. This is the pictorial representation of the pancreatic ascites. The picture shows there is a leak from the pancreatic ductal system here, and there is a leak from the pancreatic pseudocyst here. And another pictorial representation here, there is a leak from the pancreatic duct from the tail region, and pancreas being present here. After the pancreatic fluid leaks from here, the fluid goes into the lesser sac and then into the whole of the peritoneal cavity. This is and filled with pancreatic fluid, that is called pancreatic ascites. Location of the pancreatic ductal injury in pancreatic ascites varies according to circumstances. In gallstone pancreatitis, the duct disruption occurs at the neck of the pancreas. In alcoholic pancreatitis, the defect can be from anywhere in the duct. And if the leakage occurs during surgery for pancreas or nearby structures, then the injury occurs usually at the tail of the pancreas. It may be postoperative also due to anastomotic leak from the pancreatic anastomosis. There are many theories regarding causation of the pancreatic ascites, the way it forms, but the most acceptable theory is the pancreatic leakage. pancreatic fluid leakage, which irritates the peritoneum, and subsequently peritoneum produces a large amount of exudative fluid. Other less accepted theories are lymphatic obstruction in the retroperitoneum subsequent to a mass effect by the pancreatic pseudocyst, which causes increased pressure inside the lymphatic channels of the mesentery, and from where exudation occurs.
स्वयं आप हमारे की मेडिकल रिलेटेड सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ये आप रे मुंगा
Another theory,
मैं अपन गल कर रास्ता
another theory being portal venous obstruction by the enlarged pancreas or from the external pressure compression by the pancreatic pseudocyst. Clinical pictures of the pancreatic ascites. The usually patient gives the history of chronic pancreatitis in the form of pain abdomen for months to years, weight loss, diabetes, exocrine insufficiency leading to diarrhea, steatorrhea, or there may be a recent episode of acute abdominal pain following abdominal trauma. This is usually present in children. The patient may not have any symptom and suddenly may present with massive ascites. Pain as abdomen may or may not be present in pancreatic ascites. Many of the pancreatic ascites patients also have pancreatic pleural effusion, that is hydrothorax in the hydrothorax along with pancreatic ascites, which are manifested by dyspnea, chest pain, tachypnea, etc. Abdominal examination in pancreatic ascites patients reveals ascites. It is one of the least common differential diagnosis among the gamut of causes of ascites in toto. The most common of ascites being the cirrhotic ascites, followed by malignant ascites. Others are being TB ascites, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, Budd-Chiari syndrome, or renal disease, thyroid disease, heart failure, or postoperative due to multiple lymphatic, extensive lymphatic dissections, or in exudation from guts during ischemia, etc. Pancreatic ascites is evaluated initially with imaging like ultrasound of the abdomen and pelvis, and most commonly a contrast enhanced CT scan of the abdomen and pelvis. The findings on imaging may reveal features of acute pancreatitis like pancreatic edema, peripancreatic haziness, pancreatic necrosis, free fluid, or features of chronic pancreatitis like pancreatic ductal dilatation, stricture, stones, etc., along with pancreatic atrophy or fatty infiltration of the pancreas. Pancreatic pseudocysts are also a common finding in pancreatic ascites. If the pancreatic ascites is due to acute biliary pancreatitis, we may also found biliary stones, be it gallbladder or in the bile ducts. The CCT picture of the pancreatic ascites shows the Helmer sign, that is fluid external to liver and inside the chest case along with other fluid elsewhere. Here the pancreatic duct is also shown as being dilated. Pancreatic ascites is diagnosed basically from analysis of the pancreatic fluid. If the amylase level is more than 1000 international units and it is more than 3 times the plasma value, the diagnosis of pancreatic ascites being established. Here, the amylase level in pancreatic fluid may be very high, maybe 3 to 10 times more than that of serum level. Though the diagnosis of pancreatic ascites dates back to 1967 by Cameron, who also includes ascitic fluid albumin more than 3 grams per deciliter, and serum amylase is also elevated. It is evident because ascitic fluid amylase gets absorbed by the peritoneum and serum amylase gets elevated, and being an exudate, the ascitic fluid albumin remains always high in pancreatic ascites. After diagnosis of the pancreatic ascites by imaging, ultrasound, CT scan, and pancreatic fluid analysis, we are now interested for management of these cases. For management, we need to localize where the leak from the ductal system or pseudocyst, pancreatic pseudocyst occurred. Then for at first and preferable investigation for localization of the leak from the pancreatic ductal system is the magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography, which shows pancreatic duct and its abnormality like leak, strictures, and stone. If the leak is not evident, we can also do secretin enhanced MRCP or better visualization of the ductal leak. This is one picture which shows the pancreatic. This is the pancreatic duct. This is the pancreatic duct and leak from the ductal system, and the leak then fills the peritoneal cavity with pancreatic fluid, resulting in pancreatic ascites. If the leak is demonstrated by magnetic resonance pancreatography and we are planning for an intervention, then ERCP is the best. So, and it is also regarded as the more sensitive and specific mode to identify pancreatic duct anomaly and its site of its disruption. One study shows pseudocysts in pancreatic ascites in up to 80% cases, and about 1/4 cases where there were no leak found on ERCP. In another study, the leak may occur at any point from the pancreatic ductal system. Here the ERCP shows a pancreatic duct and a leakage from the pancreatic ductal system, which will result in pancreatic ascites. The management initially is multidisciplinary and multimodal, bowel rest being the best initial modality of treatment. We keep the patient nil per orally and keep him or her on total parenteral nutrition, and with bowel rest, about 1/3 of patients resolve from pancreatic ascites. By giving rest to the pancreas, the ductal leak, if it is small, seals by itself. And along with bowel rest, conservative mode of management of pancreatic ascites includes administration of different drugs which usually cause decreased pancreatic and other ductal glandular secretions. These are being somatostatin and octreotide. Along with anti-secretory drugs, we also administer diuretics, and the drugs are being supplemented with repeated paracentesis as part of the conservative management. And the factors which do not favor conservative management, that is the pancreatic ascites do not get improved with conservative management alone, are those patients with low serum sodium and albumin levels. And if the ascitic fluid protein and albumin is high, very high, and in patients with chronic pancreatitis with extensive ductal damage. And intervention mode of treatment of pancreatic ascites is indicated in patients who do not improve with conservative management, and there is evidence of ductal disruption by pancreatogram, and ER endoscopy retrograde pancreatogram with pancreatic ductal stenting, be it across the stricture or across the ampulla only, will suffice to reduce pancreatic ascites and reduce leakage of the secretion from pancreatic ductal system. When it crosses the pancreatic ductal rent, it acts as a template on which the pancreatic duct is repair over it, or if the duct only crosses the ampulla without even going near the disruption site, then also it reduces the pancreatic ductal pressure, for which the ductal leak from the pancreatic site occurs, and pancreatic rent is by this way. And 5 and 7 phase transpapillary pancreatic stents are usually used. Results of endoscopic therapy. The results are not good in cases with acute pancreatitis with necrosis, and if pancreatic ductal leak is not visualized by pancreatography before intervention, but the success rate is high in patients with partial ductal disruption and ductal disruption on the side branch ducts with main pancreatic duct intact. Then last resort is surgery. Surgery is offered to patients who do not improve with non-operative measures, and also persistent or recurrent accumulation of ascites and sudden deterioration of the clinical status of the patient being managed by conservatively or managed with some form of intervention. And there are 3 types of surgical intervention depending on the circumstance. If the pancreatic duct is dilated, the ductal disruption is anastomosed either to the stomach or to a root loop of jejunum. And if you found a pseudocyst, if there is a pancreatic duct is dilated with a leak, then the root loop of jejunum only is anastomosed to the ductal system. And if you found a pseudocyst which wall is matured, which occurs usually about 6 weeks after the onset of leak, then we anastomose the pseudocyst to either to stomach or a root loop of jejunum. And if the pancreatic ductal system is not dilated, then we resort to distal pancreatic resection along with sieving of the distal end of the pancreas, which also incorporates the pancreatic duct in it. The results of surgery: if we find ductal disruption and we anastomose the duct to the bowel, then the result will be excellent with 80 to 100% success rate. And if we do not find the rent prior to surgery, then the success rate is about 50%. Thank you.
Now we invite our second speaker, Dr. Nihar Das, to deliver his speech.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes. No.
Not visible?
Not visual, sir.
Now?
Yes. Now coming.
Hello. I've just taken out my mask. We're not allowed to take it out, so close the house, close the room. Namaskar, a big namaskar to all of you. I don't know how many people are present, but first of all, a big congratulations to all of you for celebrating the 75th year of SCB. Congratulations to all of the people who are associated with SCB from its inception till now. And you have given me an opportunity to be a part of this unique way to celebrate with this academic program. I don't think there could be better way to start all the proceedings. And thank you all of you for giving me a chance. My special thanks to Dr. Datteswar Hota, with whom my association goes back to 1990s when I was a student and he joined as a faculty in Birla Medical College. I personally always thought sometime or other during my student career to be a part of SCB, but I couldn't succeed. So this is my first interaction with SCB. Hopefully over next half an hour or so, through 11 slides, I'll be able to do justice to what has been assigned to me, that is the gastrointestinal manifestation of COVID. And I prepared the slides thinking that most of the audience would be students, so please excuse me if I sound a little bit basic and simple. Satya presented a very up-to-date management of pancreatic ascites. So please let me start with this. This slide was for the students. His Holiness Dalai Lama, with whom I have been associated for organizing camps in Dharamsala, and some of his speeches I really like to quote. We should not be very surprised. Should we be surprised at all if GI system is involved in COVID? The answer is no, because the gastrointestinal system is the highest container of the ACE2 receptors through which the COVID virus, the coronavirus, makes its way to the cells of the GI tract. In fact, all of the body tissues, barring nothing, have the ACE2 receptors. At the same time, I must tell you that not all the ACE receptors are bad. On the right side, you can see, just to show you how they look like, this is the alveolar epithelium and this is the gastrointestinal epithelium. They remain at the surface of the epithelium like this. These are the receptors, and also surface of the intestinal epithelium. They do not remain on the crypts or inside. So whatever damage they do, they start doing it from the surface of the epithelium. Not all ACE2 inhibitors, the receptors, angiotensin converting enzyme receptors are bad. There are two types, type 1, type 2, and they not ACE2. The ACE2 is again of two types. One a heavy molecule one and lesser lower molecule one, lighter molecules. The lighter molecules one are actually good for our body. They actually prevent the virus. They compete with the virus to get attached to the membrane to which the virus ultimately gets attached to make its way. It has many ways. At least one of the ways are through the transmembrane receptors. Once the virus enters into the cell by making a cleavage, it causes either inflammation by inducing secretions of inflammatory cytokines or directly affecting the vasculature, doing microvasculitis, microthrombosis, and the consequences occur thereafter. If it is an inflammation, you get inflammatory changes. If it is a thrombotic problem, you get ischemic changes. And there are some in-between changes which is a mixture of all the two or a little bit different from them in terms of functional changes. In the process, when they infect, they do shred RNA particles and we get them in the feces. In more than 60% of cases, you can identify RNA particles in the feces of the persons infected with COVID. But what is the significance? Probably there is no significance of this, because if you get RNA that is neither a living virus particle, no virus has been cultured, or neither they help you in diagnosis in 100% of cases that the patient is having COVID manifestations or not, or there is a simple presence. The spectrum of involvement of GI tract is quite huge and broad. Starting from the mildest and common form of increase in liver enzymes to the deadliest form of mesenteric ischemia leading to death of the person in about 50% of cases, even if the patient is getting operated. There could be broadly, the involvement could be divided into 4 types. One is involvement of the solid organs, that is the liver, biliary, and pancreatic, the solid organs of the digestive tract, or the luminal, in which the inflammation causes hypomotility, stasis, distension, relaxation, or ischemic changes as I described. There are some other changes which are not very significant, only described in anecdotal literature, which might be mentioning during the course of the discussion. The new thing of the long gut axis is coming up. The picture on the left side shows that the involvement of the lungs could secrete cytokines, which would increase the permeability of the gut, or increase translocation, or change the translocation, or cause microthrombi and ischemic changes. So when this happens, most of the symptoms that prelude to GI system involvement are milder in form. They do not really involve the GI tract to a serious form in majority of the cases. So in about 50% cases, about 15 to 75% to be precise, the GI system is involved, and the symptoms of the GI tract after involvement of the COVID could be the primary presentation, the initial presentation in about 15% of the cases. Later on, the pulmonary complication comes. It's a little bit, I made it easier to remember the statistics, 50% and 15%. There is decreased appetite and altered taste or change of taste or lack of taste in about half the patients. There could be a permutation and combination. And mostly because of this low motility, you have these refluxes, the nausea and vomitings, distension, pain abdomen, and because of multifactorial causes, the patient can have diarrhea starting from inflammation to stasis to bacterial changes. There could be involvement of the colon in various grades, mild to moderate to severe, and I'll be dealing them later. This may lead to dehydration, may lead to electrolyte imbalance, malnutrition in due course. The prevalence, once it was told that it is same in children, but now it is said that the prevalence is nearly half in that of children, and the involvement is more or less same as it occurs in the adult. What are the principles of management? I'm discussing principles of management here before going into particular organs, because there is a basic standard protocol of management for these people. We have to remember certain things. One is there's a four-fold risk of hospitalization in this patient. So a patient coming with pulmonary problem as well as GI problem, definitely do a RT-PCR if it hasn't been done, and expect that this patient is going to have GI problems during the course of the disease. Half of them would be having that. So anticipate. That is most important thing. And we have to remember that the course of the disease, the presentation, the diagnosis, and the treatment is practically no different than the disease of the organ because of other causes, so bacterial, parasitic, metabolic, immunologic, whatever you say, with very few exceptions, of course. The backbone of management of GI system involvement is symptomatic, mostly supportive. You have to keep the blood volume intact to prevent thrombosis. The nutrition has to be maintained. The vitamin supplementation, electrolyte supplementations have to be updated or should be given time to time basis. As I said, there are 4 groups of involvement. The liver is involved in COVID in 3 ways. One is a direct immunological injury reaction. Second is direct involvement of the virus to destroy the liver cells. Here I must say that in liver, the bile duct cells or the cholangiocytes have the maximum saturation of the AC receptors. That is about 80%, and the hepatic cells are about 20%. The third, which is rather more important in my view, how the liver is involved is the drugs. There are about at times we used to give 30, 40 drugs to these people. And in ICU, there is no end to the list of drugs they are taking. The vasopressors, the low flow states, all these affect the liver. The commonest, of course, the manifestations of this is the mildest form, the increase in enzymes, no increase in bilirubin. And mostly it is the ALT which acts as a marker for the severity of the disease. So management is conservative. There are anecdotal cases of hepatic necrosis described, but that is associated with very, very severe disease. I don't know whether they are because of the virus per se or the treatment which is associated. The gallbladder in any viral infection gets stasis. The motility becomes less. And in this viral disease, the gallbladder gets inflamed, and this is ultrasound. You can see the gallbladder, the wall is edematous, there is pericholecystic edema, the halo thing which you are seeing. And mostly it is a acalculous type of cholecystitis. And in the CT scan, you can see the gallbladder is thickened with edema. So the acalculous cholecystitis management in COVID is different from acalculous cholecystitis that occurs commonly in diabetes and immunocompromised people. In immunocompromised people, we have to do cholecystectomy within 24 hours. The patient will become severely septicemic. But it has been seen that if you do a cholecystectomy in these patients in COVID, the chance of dying is more than 25%. So what is prescribed is you pass a tube under radiology guidance. That is called percutaneous cholecystostomy, and pass it into the gallbladder, drain the bile over 6 weeks period of time. The patient becomes fine, the tract is maintained, take out the tube, the tract heals, and the patient also cured. And similarly, another organ which is saturated with SCE2 inhibitors receptors is pancreas. The pancreas can get inflammation of various forms, various stages: acute, mild, moderate, severe, necrotic, necrotizing, infective. So all stages can be seen in COVID, and the process or the pathological process is similar to other causes like gallstone, alcoholic, and other causes. So this is the diagnosis is based on, of course, the amylase lipase symptoms and CT scan, which is made usually after 48 hours of having disease. Before that, if you do a CT scan, you won't find anything. So this is a picture. I hope you can see my cursor. Only the tail of the pancreas is visible. The head of the pancreas is in this area is destroyed and replaced by fluids and inflammation. In the second one, it has progressed. It has progressed to complete necrosis, infection, collection, and this black air inside that indicates that there is either a bowel communication or there is infection inside. So all these forms can be seen, and the management is similar to acute pancreatitis, that in 80%, 85% cases, mild pancreatitis managed conservatively. And in about rest of 25%, if infection occurs, then intervention is required in the form of putting a tube or doing a surgery. Almost all of the luminal gastrointestinal system, starting from the mouth till anus, is involved by the COVID. Starting from sore throat to severe proctitis. The esophagus can be involved and can have just simple esophagitis, sore throat, stickiness while taking food, or as this endoscopy shows, hemorrhagic areas, bleeding, and in anecdotal cases, it can lead to rupture also. And this is a CT scan which shows that one side of the lungs is fine, the other side is replaced with fluid. The esophagus has got ruptured and leaking all the fluids into the pleural cavity and reaction and fluids thereafter. These are again, the management is mostly conservative until unless the complication is so severe to go for surgery. This small bowel has been the major part of the discussion so far as the COVID is involved. It occurs in various forms. Mostly it is mild form of jejunoenteritis, loose motions, distension, loss of appetite, little bit bowel pain. But it can go to form, I will discuss later on. As you can see from this CT scan, the necrosis of the bowel, ischemia of the bowel. Here you can see the bowel is not been opacified at all. And this is partially opacified. We don't give oral contrast to these people before doing a CT scan because that hampers the vascular status of the patient. So don't give oral contrast. And in the next one, you can see the liver here has black spots, and it is longitudinal black spot coming down below till the small bowel. This is the portal vein that has got gas, and the gas has gone into the liver. This is the sine qua non array, very indicative of intestinal necrosis and possible infection. And if you open this patient, open the abdomen of this patient, you get a picture like this with necrosis and various phases of ischemia. The colon is involved in two ways. Either the motility is hampered, causing the entire colon to be distended. As you can see in the first plain X-ray of the abdomen, the whole colon is distended. And if you do a CT or MRI, you can see the entire colon is distended, even leading to small bowel as well as stomach distension, a condition we call the pseudo obstruction or Ogilvie syndrome. And the management, of course, is conservative, and you can put a flatus tube, decompress it, or put a colonoscope and decompress it. Basically, the aim is to decompress and manage conservatively, or else we have to put a tube through by surgery into the cecum to make a cecostomy. The other half of the spectrum of the colonic involvement is more serious. That is of ischemic type. In that case, the segment or whole of the colon gets ischemic and necrose. So you can see from this plain X-ray, there is no hustration of the colon, transverse colon. The margin absolutely smooth, featureless. And this is a feature of a ischemic colon or a necrosed colon. And if you do a CT scan, you can find this huge distension almost and thinned out wall almost going for rupture, and you have to intervene this patient to either take the colon out or do a diversion depending upon the condition of the patient. The deadliest manifestation of gastrointestinal manifestations of COVID is acute mesenteric ischemia. In fact, to the later part of the first half of the COVID crisis, this was the problem in many areas, especially from Gujarat areas and all those. And we used to see patients, it was from everywhere. And it was really, we were unable to save the patients because of course, logistic reasons. Most of these patients nearly all of them would have a COVID change of the lungs. That you see the infiltrations are there. And these patients, they present with pain abdomen, especially pain after taking food, because there is lack of blood supply to stomach and small bowel. The patient eats means the bowel cries for blood supply. That's why there is severe pain and really unbearable pain. And if you examine, you may find tenderness if there is ischemia or necrosis. And you do a plain X-ray of the abdomen, you can see that there is edema of the mucosa impinging into the lumen of the bowel, so-called forming the thumb printing appearance. You can see like thumb they get in, and or called sawtooth appearance. And this is also a very important sign for mesenteric ischemia. It could be arterial involvement, it could be a venous involvement. If it is arterial involvement, which is more common, is of two types, either obstructive or obstructive, that is non-obstructive mesenteric ischemia. The obstructive variety is due to a main bolus of clot obstructing the superior mesenteric artery. The non-obstructive one occurs in low flow states, means when there is the blood flow to the bowel is very, very low, or there is very peripheral microangiopathy. That occurs when there is COVID-related cardiac failure, the cardiac functions are down, the pulmonary functions are down, patient is hypotensive, on ventilator, the vasopressors. So these low flow states reduce blood flow to the small valve, and so that thereby they can cause ischemia. You must remember, after pulmonary, heart is the next organ which is maximum saturated with AC2 receptors. So when these things happen, a CT scan is usually the standard investigation to confirm the diagnosis. Don't give oral contrast, and you can see that the intestines, the valvular conjunctives are completely lost. The margin is irregular and is less opacified. Sometimes they are completely non-opacified. And if you see the vascular cuts, you can see here, this is aorta, this is superior mesenteric artery, there is a clot in superior mesenteric artery. So when there is a superior mesenteric artery clot blocking this supplied bowel here are shown in violet color, they get ischemic. And it is confirmed by a DSA, by a angiogram. Here you can see the superior mesenteric artery is little bit opacified, and after that there is nothing. And you can see the stump of the superior mesenteric artery. Beyond that, it is nothing. A reconstructed image, you can see this is the superior mesenteric artery, and this is the renal artery. The superior mesenteric artery has stopped short after this. If this happens, then you would get this type of picture if you open up the abdomen of the patient. So in various forms and various grades, the bowel looks like, if you happen to see it through a laparoscope or an open abdomen. These all are dictated by the condition of the patient. For example, if you find that the CT scans features are not there, but there is a strong suspicion, you can start the patient on anticoagulant. That is required for everybody. All the patients of those are having suspicion. But if CT scan or imaging finding is having little bit of doubt, do a laparoscopy or a open and see what is there inside the abdomen. You will find various grades of obstruction. This is a normal one. This is partially ischemic. This is more ischemic. This is ischemia with degraded hemoglobin that is causing it black. And it could be frankly gangrenous. Now, there is a little bit difference between the ischemic changes of COVID versus ischemic changes because of thrombosis, because of other causes. The difference is, what people have noticed is, it mostly involves the terminal ileum, and it has skip lesions, small lesions skipping the areas, and it looks more or less yellow patchy areas. So these areas are completely gone, so they had to be resected. And if you put a laparoscope, you can see some confirmed things that it all depends upon surgeon's appreciation. If he thinks that it is a case of complete necrosis here, I can't say, nobody can say. You have to see by doing tapping it and see peristalsis, do ICG, indocyanine green testing, or do some ultrasonography to see the vascular pulsations. If you're not finding, you can straightway go ahead with a resection and anastomosis as has been shown here. If we're having a little bit doubt, plus minus, close it, and we can go ahead for a second look laparotomy after 24 to 48 hours. In the meantime, if we suspect that there is a obstruction because of clot or thrombus, we can take the help of radiology, do angiography, can open the blockade, we can stent it. Here is a picture which shows the catheter has gone into the SMA, and you can inject vasodilators like papaverine, and that can also suffice at some in non-occlusive types. You can stent also. And if this is not successful, sometimes it is not successful because of the strong thrombus, non-dislodgeable thrombus, then you can take the help of surgery, open that area and take out the thrombus and close it, or put a stent inside, or you can bypass the entire thing by putting a graft. And when you do all these things, you can expect in your second look laparoscopy that these ischemic pictures, if they are not really gangrenous, they would come back to vascularization, or even they can look normal. You must remember the whatever you do till now, the mortality stands around 50 to 70% even after surgery in this situation. There could be, these are about the GI system involvement that has been described. There are some anecdotal things described here and there, which I don't want to confuse. This is another aspect which is coming up in the form of what is called long COVID syndrome, LONG. That is, in the long term, the COVID is showing its sequelae. By definition, the sequelae, GI problem as a sequelae of the corona or the COVID is appearance of the GI symptoms after complete resolution of the COVID symptoms. That's around 3 to 3 months. It can continue up to 6 months. All these can happen, what I have discussed. The factors are also similar to the pre-COVID situation. That is, age more than 60 years, male. There's no practically difference between male and female. High BMI, hypertension, diabetes, increased hospital stay, ICU stay, if the patient has severe respiratory problem, severe myalgia, or steroid intake. There is a little bit confusion about the proton pump inhibitor intake. Earlier on, see, till now, COVID infection of the stomach has not been described. And people say that the acid takes care of the COVID if it is swallowed or take. Mostly in other viral infections where the gastrointestinal tract is involved, it is said that the swallowed thing goes there and causes. But actually, subsequently, long series haven't really identified that PPI to be a negative factor. But I would say one line on this, that if you are using PPI, then better to use esomeprazole rather than other PPIs, because esomeprazole has an anti-inflammatory effect in the body. Recently, this discussion on inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's have come up. There is a concern that already they are inflamed, and if virus would go, then what will happen? There are two phases of the inflammatory bowel disease. One is the acute phase, one is the remission phase. In the remission phase, most of the people are in the remission phase, less of symptoms, signs. There is no high risk of COVID infection to them. There is no chance of flare-up if COVID happens to them. Rather, as I said, there is a upregulation of type 2, those low molecule type of ACE2 receptors in these people. So might be they're having that is limiting their infection. So there is no change in treatment plan for mesalazine, acetylsalicylic, the ASAs or the small dose steroids. This is unlike the influenza pandemic, wherein the ulcerative inflammatory bowel disease becomes very, very severe. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I can send to give you some take-home messages, this virus is different. The earth is with coronavirus since millions of years, at least documented 8,000 years prior BC. But nothing of this sort has happened. The last corona pandemic was in 2002. And at that time, even the GI system involvement, the chest involvement was not so severe. How come within this short period of time, this has become so severe? So that is how the speculation is, possibly it is man-made, possible. So is it laboratory made? This virus is very sly, very slippery, and this can mimic any pathogen affecting to the organ which is inhabited by ACE2 inhibitors. So, and these viruses can also change the gut microbiome. They can delete the microbiome, they can change the microbiome, they can allow translocation, and they can make them pathogenic. All these things are possible, that we have to keep in mind. Whether on this basis, the prebiotic, probiotics are to be supplemented or not, might be a matter of debate, but if you give, no harm. So what is most important thing is all these are more or less no different than the usual diseases, but only thing needed is don't allow them to be mismanaged. Anticipate, anticipate, and anticipate. A few words about the vaccinations. There are discussions on vaccination in each form of disease of field, in all the organs. Trials are there. All the vaccines have undergone trial, and the result says that vaccinate when you can. If the patient is absolutely symptomatic, that is possibly not the period to vaccinate. But if the patient is non-COVID, vaccinate whatever patient is, be it liver disease, cirrhosis, inflammatory bowel disease, post-op, malignancy, or liver transplant. Give them vaccination. And if the patient is COVID positive, delay it for 3 months, maybe do a antibody assessment and give a vaccination. As far as liver transplant, just a single word, no hindrance to do a liver transplant. Mostly the elective settings they are avoiding, mostly the immunosuppressants, barring mycophenolate and everolimus, which is too used in transplants, they are not used. Rest of the things and the infliximabs, they are to be avoided, and otherwise rest of the treatment remains the same. So last but not the least, I would say that earlier on pre-COVID era, during our teaching, we used to say, if you think, if you diagnose the common things, you will be commonly correct. If you do rare things, you will be rarely correct. We say that, yes, diagnose the common things, but keep the rare things in mind. But COVID has landed us in such a situation that we say that until unless proved otherwise, keep COVID in mind and diagnose the COVID. And if you are getting COVID, it's fine. If you're not getting, or you are getting, don't forget that the standard diseases could play a role here. So they should not be neglected or mismanaged. Otherwise, by the time you finish up the COVID course, they will be progressing to the next level. Lastly, we had underestimated the pandemic. This is not my version. This is WHO's version. This is experts' version. So let's not repeat it. Try our best, try to persuade our surroundings to take care and avoid having corona pandemic again. Thank you very much.
Well, moderator to take over. Jai Singh.
Sir, I thank from the core of my heart to Professor Datteswar Hota, our Dean and Principal, for his valuable guidance.
Oh, wait. You're going to straight to the vote of thanks. Anybody has any query, and if he wants to know something more than what has been told. I have one query. Nihar, this is a presentation, we in the first wave we didn't have much of information about the GI involvement. Take care, please. We didn't have much of information about the GI involvement. In the second wave, it has come with real vengeance. We get a lot of reports, involvement of the ischemic enterocolitis, a lot of information. But the fact remains, I have one query. Is there any isolated GI involvement sparing the lungs?
Yes, in 15% of cases, there could be isolated GI involvement sparing the lungs. The commonest is liver. The next comes the small bowel, and third comes the colon.
Because we are more focused to the lungs. If you remember,
No,
when
in,
we say,
in 15% of cases, it would be isolated.
and how do we explain? We know the portal of entry is mainly the respiratory entry. Ingestion is not the major entry portal, isn't it? How do you explain that?
Yes, one of the postulations is what happens in the respiratory system. Like in any viral disease, why GI system is less involved is we swallow or we inhale the virus directly bang onto the alveolar mucosa, the mucosa, and direct involvement of it. But the virus goes to the GI tract either in late stages through the circulation, nobody knows, or if it goes directly, it has to go through very lots of hindrances. One is through the stomach, the acid, then the intestinal enzymes, then the finally the lymph nodal tissue of the small bowel, which secretes antiviral substances in the form of cytokines. These are all postulations. Actually, honestly, I don't have an answer. The literature doesn't have. We have 1.5 lakhs of record literatures on COVID during this 1.5 years and 3,700 plus literatures on gastrointestinal involvement of the COVID. None of them could clearly say how this happens. Even not the straight way. We don't know.
No,
We
all
actually
of us,
don't.
we know, Nihar, all of us, it is the ACE2 inhibitor, particularly the heavy one.
Yes.
Heavy one as a major responsible for the, attachment of the virus. That's through the spike. That is what exactly the pathogenesis that has been thought over, and GI is full of ACE2 inhibitor, all the GI tract. So why it only specifically mainly affects the small bowel?
No, it affects everything.
Because, hardly any features which mentions about stomach. Is
No,
it because of the acidic nature?
It is actually not. Small bowel comes much lower down the order of involvement. It is becoming more dramatic with small bowel. That's why the picture is coming more towards us. So more and more now colon is becoming more dramatic to us. So we are going by that way. But otherwise, if you see, all involvement falls in between 10 to 15% cases. Rather, liver is maximum involved in comparison to all others.
No, you mentioned about liver. That part is there. This is again a viral hepatitis. The pathogenesis being different than the other virus.
Yes.
Isn't it? The pathogenesis is different.
Yes.
It gives rise to thrombus and all those pathogenesis that affects the liver. So this is not a true viral hepatitis as compared to the hepatitis A, B, and C, because they're totally different in pathogenesis.
No, not true. It's not true. There is only 1/3 of patients who are true viral hepatitis in COVID. There's 2/3 are others.
Okay. I think these are all things I wanted my query to be clarified. Anybody else? Anybody else has anything to mention? Professor Patra, you want to say something? Professor UC Patra?
Sir. Thank you, sir. This is a very nice presentation by Dr. Anand Das. And he has very nicely presented. Here also we have seen many cases of transaminitis and many cases present with few degrees of jaundice. Even the jaundice persists even after the COVID. I will ask one question to Professor Dr. Anand Das, that what we will do in the case of acute appendicitis in a COVID situation, COVID with appendicitis.
Yes.
Dr. Das, please.
Yes, COVID with appendicitis, the treatment has no confusion, go for surgery. There are two types of appendicitis, obstructive, non-obstructive. When the appendicitis is because of other causes other than COVID, the non-obstructive types, you can manage with conservative management and then they can recover. You may go for a surgery later on, may not, depending upon the barium study. That is the protocol. If it is obstructive, you have to go in. But in COVID, you have to go in any case. You can't manage them conservative for appendix. Why? Because it has been seen that the appendectomies are much more safer as in comparison to cholecystectomies. I also don't know why, but they are quite safe. And if are not done, the complication, the septicemia, because it's connectivity to the portal vein, causing septicemia later on, and easily secondarily infected with bacteria, which is not there with gallbladder. So secondary bacterial invasion is very, very high in these people. So I would suggest, on the basis of literature, go for surgery if the patient is fit for surgery.
Thank you, Dr. Nihar. I think we can-
Another thing, since Umesh Bhai is there, I'm saying that the cirrhotic patients and liver involved patients, if the liver is diseased, there are two ways: either liver is diseased and having corona, or the corona patients developing into liver problem. We have discussed that the liver disease patients having corona, the outcome is very, very poor. We have shown it in a publication from AIIMS. Second important thing is, these people go on shedding viruses for a very, very long time, even 15 days, 21 days, or even 3 months. So it is recommended that if you are done, if liver disease patients are having corona, do check their virus status in 15 days or first month to tell that they are virus free or symptom risk free.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, I must convey my personal thank to you. The other day I spoke to you and I requested that you must join. You have accepted our request. I hand over to the moderator for the formal vote of thanks. Professor Dr. Dujyan Sahu, you want to ask anything?
Yes, I want to state that this virus is such a virus, it does not spare any system of the body, starting from the respiratory system, GI system, nervous system, and the brain, everywhere. Because this our previous president, Pranab Mukherjee, died of COVID due to COVID intracranial hematoma. So one should remember that it doesn't spare any system of the body, and it can affect any, within the year. In the year there is some swelling, and that you have seen that the virus is there in the swelling. So we should keep in mind while taking these things, have this mind that it doesn't spare any system or any part of the body to be affected by this, and that should be the anticipation while taking the COVID virus.
Oh, thank you, sir. You have pointed out. That brings me to give you another information. The mucormycosis, which is creating was creating a havoc, but GI system now, we have seen 2 cases here, along with mucormycosis of the paranasal sinuses, 2 cases of large bowel mucormycosis here.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Jayanta want to say something. He's already surfaced. Quickly. Already we have the meeting, you know. Next we have the meeting. Yeah.
Sir, very interesting presentation, sir. Just I wanted to tell that we should encourage tests based on the stool examination, which is not only easier and can also will be rewarding if it detects the virus. So what is the opinion of Dr. Nihar?
I already spoken about that.
Yeah.
The 1 year back, there were case reports strongly stamping that this is a virus which goes through fecal-oral route, and you should do fecal testing to diagnose this. Very strongly recommended. Then after that, we have enough case series, prospective studies in 6,000 patients like that, which says that there is the mere presence of RNA in the stool is not an indicator that the patient is having disease or which grade, or he is a carrier. Yes, it may be useful in epidemiological studies. Like for example, in my community, 10 people are affected, do 60 people and say, oh yes, this might be affected. When any total patient coming, do a stool testing, the virus may be positive, might have engulfed some virus through water or something, but that has not affected the patient. So So it's actually has not taken up the stool examination, but in Korea, they are now into this type of investigations to detect epidemiologically the things. I think now,
very-
yes.
Thank you, thank you. Let's wind up because we have another meeting, you know, that Professor Panda.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Again, thank you, Nihar. Hand over to
Thank you, sir.
moderator for a quick vote of thanks.
I thank from the core of my heart to Professor Datteswar Hota, our respected Dean and Principal, for his valuable guidance for this program. I thank Dr. Neharanjan Das, Professor GI Surgery, AIIMS New Delhi, for his excellent and informative talk on GI manifestation of COVID. I also thank Dr. Satyaprasad Samandra, my colleague, assistant professor in our department, for his nice presentation. I must extend my thanks to all our senior and junior faculties, others who have participated in the program. Finally, I thank Mr. Devasis, our telemedicine assistant, for the help he has done for us. Thanking you all.
Thank you, Sarad. Thank you, everybody.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Dattavai. Thank you, Banasar. Banasar is there or he has left?
Thank you, Professor Dr. Thank you, Dr. Anadas, sir. I'm Dr. Patra speaking. Thank you, Dr. Anadas.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Namaste, namaste.
Nihar,
You are
Voice is not audible.
Nihar college से पूछिए, college से.
Oh, sir, namaskar. Sir, namaskar.
केमते छ निहार बहुत ଭଲ ତ କଥା ବହୁତ ମନେ ପଡେ ସବୁବେଳେ
Ah,
ଯିଏ ଦିଲ୍ଲୀ ଯାଆନ୍ତି ସବୁବେଳେ
I still remember your thyroids.
Chanti, I always remember you.
ନିହାର ସାଙ୍ଗରେ
I always remember you.
यार ଆପଣ
Can you
ତ ତମେ ବରମପୁର ଗଲା ପରେ ତମ ସାଙ୍ଗେ ଦେଖା
will send some cases of liver transplant to you?
Yes, yes, yes.
देखा ही ଟିକେ liver transplant test ପଠେଇବା ଆପଣଙ୍କ ପାଖକୁ.
Yes, yes, I'll send.
Dr. Anand Das, please. ये liver transplant case पठेइबो.
Yes, yes, there. I can
Liver
send
transplant
plenty.
case ଟିକେ ପଠେଇବା ଆପଣଙ୍କ ପାଖକୁ.
I can send plenty of them. Since Corona,
No, we will send to you.
Acha, okay. But since Corona,
ठीक
we
है
have not
ଆମେ
done
ଟିକେ
a single
ପଠେଇବା ଆପଣଙ୍କ
transplant.
ପାଖକୁ.
It's a very bad situation here. All my
No,
department.
you can work up.
Yes.
All ICU is for corona patients.
Yes, yes.
All ICU are fixed for corona patients.
Our GI surgery ward was converted to Corona ward for 6 months.
Okay. Acha. But still, you work up and then do transplant sometimes electively.
Yes.
We will send some cases to you.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
ନିହାର ତମର ସବୁ ପିକନିକ କଥା ମନେ ଅଛି ତ ଯୋଉ ପିକନିକ ଯାଇଥିଲେ ଆମେ ସବୁ
हाँ.
So much.
I have the photographs. mo किछि दिन तळे mo group रे हमर जो 1978 batch रे group रे I put some photographs of those picnic.
ते फोटोग्राफ ଅଛି ପଠେଇବ ମୋ ନମ୍ବର ମୁଁ ତମକୁ ପଠେଇ ଦେବି ପଠେଇବ
हाँ. किंतु I am unable to know whether they were MKCG photograph picnic ki Burla photograph.
अरे बुगुड़ा को जो ଯାଇଥିଲେ
हाँ, बुगुड़ा रे अछि. Yes, बुगुड़ा है.
बुगुड़ा डैम को जो ଯାଇଥିଲେ हां.
Yes. That only I posted.
किता माने सब बड़ा केते बड़ा लेन सब
My elder daughter is doing MD pulmonary medicine in Grant, Mumbai,
अच्छा
and the younger one is final year.
Oh, nice. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nihar. Thank you.